I don't think I'm qualified yet. I haven't participated in my minimum number of sessions.
Sometimes it's just whoever shows up and is willing to do it.
Right.
I will do my best.
I don't know. You've got experience in it.
You know, we're all sitting here writing down your passwords, right? Just kidding.
Yes.
My IT guy at work, he says, you gotta change your passwords like every quarter.
Well, then I can't remember.
They make us do that.
I know, I put it in my calendar, so yesterday I started changing my passwords.
I can't. I try to stick to the same 4 or 5, but I'm like, oh, which one is this? You know, and then
You know, you go through some applications and you change the password and they say, okay, log out, log back in. So you do that, then it doesn't recognize your new password.
yes.
So you put in the old password, it doesn't recognize that either. So I had to call for one of our.
I can. I can sit wherever I want.
I was sitting where Kevin is. You haven't heard from him though?
Mallory, should I
Yeah, John's definitely
Mallory,
out.
should I sit wherever I want? My shared home's awful company.
I am?
Haha.
I don't know if anybody told me that.
Right.
Okay, so you want me to do it? She can do it, right? Or do I have to? I have to do it.
John actually elected you secretary, so you can think.
Does that mean we should switch seats?
He can stay where he's at. I don't care. Stay where you're at.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. We're all informal. I mean, what the heck?
Since I'm way out of practice at this, Sarah will keep me in line, I'm sure. In the absence of Kevin Case, I'm Dave Wood. I'll get the meeting called to order, please. Item 1 on the agenda. First thing is the approval of the agenda from the July 6th, 2017 meeting. I'll entertain motion to approve.
Move to approve.
Any second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Minutes are approved. Third item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for June 1st, 2017. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
Any seconds?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Item 4 of the agenda, public hearing, consideration of conditional use permit application, the cause. I will open the public hearing of this, and I believe we will start with staff.
Sure, we'll just start with the procedure. So conditional use permits require you all to make a recommendation to the city council. This is about a shared parking arrangement, which we've dealt with several times in the past. We did send out mailed notices to property owners within 185 feet, posted a notice on the property, and published notice in the Kansas City Star. We do have the applicant here tonight to explain to you what they would like to do.
Very well. And who will that applicant be?
Yes.
So hi, I'm Amy Slattery. I'm an architect and I'm a owner of Otomo Architecture in Kansas City. It's my first time doing this, so help me with this. We are working for the Cause Church, and I am here as a representative of the landlord to ask for this approval of the conditional use. Basically, they need a total of 232 spaces on Sunday mornings, and the landlord has available spaces in adjacent sites that would meet that requirement. The current existing space on site is only 132 spaces when you take out the other tenant uses. So we're asking that we share spaces from the adjacent sites at 51 Design Drive and 31 Design Drive. That's essentially it.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
Okay, this is right there beside Advanced Auto.
Correct.
Okay, do you know whether they're open on Sunday morning?
I don't have their exact hours. I know they are open on Sundays. I'm not sure if they're open in the mornings. We have reviewed this with the landlord, and their spaces will be accommodated, which is why there's only 132 available for the church. So there's a designated parking area for Advanced Auto Parts that will not be used for the church parking, which is why they need additional off-site.
And that Zone 6, are they, you don't know whether they're open either?
I don't know, I don't have that with me right now. But there's a total of, I don't know if I have that total on here. There's only 132 available. There's a total of 376 available parking spots on the whole site, and only 132 of those 376 are designated for the church. So there's another 244 that's used by other tenants. So that won't be in conflict with those other adjacent attendants.
Do you have
tenants.
a plan?
Yes.
That if they do have a conflict, that you'll be able to fix it, or?
So there is not a conflict because we're providing additional adjacent spaces on 2 adjacent sites that the landlord owns that will be sharing spaces during Sunday mornings.
But is that
Do you have this exhibit? Was this part of that?
Yeah. Is that across Design Drive, or
Yes,
then you gotta walk all the way around the building?
correct. And there will be signage, that's part of the agreement, there will be signage provided. The Cause Church currently is located, their first location's off the plaza, and they have shared parking arrangements around that area for the 300 to 400 that attend Sunday morning services, and they're used to walking quite a ways. So that's the intent here, is that there will be signage, and it will be adequately posted that they are not to use those reserved spots for the adjacent tenants.
You don't know whether there's a back door there.
There is a back door that will be used for egress only, though,
I
in
guess,
this
okay.
situation. So they'll be directed to come around to the front, to the main entrance.
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
I'm assuming then you're saying that the spaces are going to be marked where they can park?
There will be signage, that will be temporary signage, that's what I think is noted in here. So there'll be temporary signage for Sunday mornings only
I mean,
that indicate where they should park and where they should not park.
the only thing that worries me are and I'm not the landlord, but
Mhm.
the advanced, the Zone 6 and the nuts and bolts hardware, that there are enough spaces for their customers to come park, because everybody wants to park in front of the building.
Correct.
That all the parishioners don't take up all of the spaces designed for them, and then they come back and start asking us what's going to happen next.
Right, and I don't have that detailed diagram in front of me, but we did do a diagram that shows the area south of the building, which is at the entrance to Advanced Auto Parts. That would be their designated parking, and it's only the parking in front of the Cause Church tenant front that would be designated.
And this will be marked every Sunday and taken down every Sunday.
Correct.
My only question is, how do you know your estimated attendance? What is that based on? And this is a new location, right? So
Yeah, it's a new location, and that's kind of part of the code analysis we've done as well in terms of the capacity. They have had upwards to 300 to 500 on attendance at their current plaza location, and the current occupancy for the actual auditorium area, the gathering place, will be capped at about 500. It's just slightly under that. So that's a code requirement, though. That's their maximum occupancy. They do have children that attend, and so the total maximum occupancy of the building will be 700. And that's actually another conversation we're having that has to do with their bathroom count. So they will be maxing out at 700 total, 500 in attendance in the actual sanctuary, and then maximum of 200 in the other parts of the building. So that is how we came to our calculated number. That was the 234 spots.
Do they plan on having any other, like Wednesday night or any?
They do, but those are small group. Those aren't full. They're more small group Bible studies. They're not full presentations.
Any other questions from commissioners? Any comments from the public? Hearing none, what do we do now? Take a vote?
Do you want to hear the staff report?
I want to hear the staff report. That's a great idea.
A church is a permitted use in this zoning district, and so we're not concerned about the use of the church. This is really just about, as Amy said, the parking count. As this building has been repurposed for different tenants, the landlord is required to show how they're providing the required amount of parking for each of those tenants. And because churches, it's based on the number of seats, that's why occupancy is an issue. That requires more parking spaces. Once you've allocated the parking to all the other tenants, then is available on the site. The shared parking arrangement before you is all under one ownership, which makes things a little bit easier. As staff, we would recommend approval of this conditional use permit. We do have 3 conditions, 2 of which are our standard conditional use permit conditions. One is that it's specific to this use. If the cause were to relocate to another place or just move out of this building, this conditional use permit would end. But the main one, as Amy noted, is that they shall provide temporary signage to help direct people to the appropriate places to park, particularly these parking spaces that are not on site. So we would recommend approval of this conditional use permit with those 3 conditions. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have for me.
Any questions for the staff?
Okay, you have certain conditions.
They're at the bottom of page 4 of the staff report.
Oh, okay.
Just one last question. Will you expect to have people directing traffic as well, so that, you know, if somebody can't find the open spots and it's around the corner or in the back, there will be people to kind of, especially, you know, as you get your first time, you know, attendees and people getting familiar with the new location on site to kind of help with that, since a lot of people will be arriving all at the pretty much same window?
I can make a note of that to the client to assure they do that. I know that right now they have they're very much about outreach, and so they have a very visible presence at doors and entryways. I'm just not sure about the specifics on parking, and so we can add that to the conversation or to this if that's so desired, especially as they get started. I'm sure there'll be a lot of communication about that. I just don't know that they have that in place.
That would be my recommendation.
Yep.
Just as a sign is good, but sometimes people, if there's no one to enforce it there or directing them with a light or a cone, they'll just kind of, oh, this one's
Yeah.
close. And
Yeah.
Any further questions or comments from the commissioners? Hearing none. What's our next step?
A motion.
I move that we accept conditional use permit PC 2017-09 with recommended conditions.
Any seconds?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
aye.
Any opposed? All right. Approved.
Great. Thank you so much.
This will be on the July 18th City Council agenda.
I apologize for I didn't bring my stack of paperwork. I don't know why. All right, next on the agenda is a site plan review for the North Kansas City School District. What's up first for that?
So this is, and slightly, as we discussed last month, a slightly unusual case before you, and that usually you all don't do site plan review, but in our residential zoning districts for schools, you do. And this was a condition of approval of the North Kansas City High School site plan, was that you all would also do site plan review for the parking lot plans when they were finished. So that's what's before you tonight. Again, we have 2 criteria for reviewing the site plans for school facilities. And there was a condition that you all placed on the approval last month regarding landscaping of these parking areas. So we also had to do a variance request for this that went before the BZA last month regarding the setbacks from public streets in our residential zoning districts. That's required setback is 30 feet. And the school district asked for that to be lessened, partly because the city-owned parking lot that they're leasing, actually, they discovered in doing the survey, crossed into the right-of-way. So the BZA did approve that variance, which we addressed in the staff report. So we do have representatives of the engineers for this. I'm here to talk to you about the site plan for these 2 parking areas, and I will let them kind of present their plans.
All right. Who are we going to hear from?
Good evening. My name is Brian Hill. I'm with MKEC Engineering and here to represent North Kansas City School District in regard to the site plans and parking lots here that are proposed. The site plans cover 2 parking lot locations. The first is the expansion of a city-owned lot near the intersection of 24th and Iron. There's an existing parking lot, surface parking lot there at 25th and Iron that will be expanded to the south. As Sarah mentioned, the plan for this parking lot has been amended, even the existing parking lot, to bring the parking lot back onto the property. Certain portions of the existing parking lot were into the Iron and 25th Street right of way. So we've made that change and then expanded the parking lot there to the south. The second parking lot that we are looking at is on 25th Street. It's just to the east of the Norclay building. There, we're adding 80 parking stalls there in that open space between the building and the track and field events there, just to the west of the track. That'll be a new parking lot with 2 accesses from 25th Street. Landscaping is proposed for the parking lots. We're adding street trees, going back to the Iron lot, adding street trees there along 25th Street, and then some landscaping there on the 25th Street lot there along 25th Street to provide screening. One item to note, the expansion of the Iron Street lot, there is currently fencing that is adjacent to the existing residential homes there on the east side of that parking lot. The residential lot there adjacent to the new portion of the lot on 24th Street currently has fencing around a portion of their property, around the garage in the back, and then currently has some shrubs along their driveway there. The MKEC and the school district have had conversations with those homeowners, and our proposal is to place a 6-foot privacy fence there along their driveway. It would basically be a continuation of their existing fence there to provide screening for that. We discussed landscaping there as well as a fence, and came to the consensus with the homeowner there that a fence would be a preferable screening option there for the parking lot. So we're proposing that there for that screening, and then also there on the north side of that existing lot there, there's an adjacent home that fronts 25th Street. There's a current fence in their backyard. We'll be extending a privacy fence there along their home, up to 25th Street to provide screening to their house as well. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Go ahead, Tom.
A couple of questions on the Iron Street parking lot. You're taking the ingress and egress off of Iron Street totally, correct?
Correct. There's an existing driveway there off of Iron.
Correct.
We are eliminating that. I feel that'll be a better situation for traffic flow along Iron Street.
So everybody that is going to use this lot is going to have to come up 24th Street and turn to get into the lot and leave off at 25th Street. So I don't know how many places are on there. How many parking places are on there, approximately?
Approximately on this lot, there will be 74.
So we're going to have
total.
75 cars a day coming up 24th Street and exiting it off 25th Street because there's no other way to get there. Correct?
Correct. With the one-way condition
streets.
of those streets, that is the case. They will exit off 25th Street, enter 24th. They will also be able to exit to 24th Street and go west to get to Iron
Okay.
there.
When we pave over the existing dirt, we're gonna call it right now, we are not gonna put any more runoff onto the private tenants' properties, correct?
Correct. That,
I mean, we're gonna design it in such a way to where it's either going to go onto the spillways or whatever else, because I don't wanna get a call from residents saying, I've got a basement full of water.
correct. The new portion of the lot there on 24th Street will drain south and west toward 24th into Iron and will not drain toward the residential homes.
Any other questions?
Just a quick question. I kind of walked the parking lot here this afternoon to get a better idea of what it is. And I noticed the plan says that, you know, the existing trees on the north side of the lot there facing 25th Avenue would all be removed and remove the bollard, as it says. Is that mandatory because we need to move the parking lot back? Or was there any way to, I mean, I was just looking at the trees. I mean, they're good-sized trees, you know, and I was thinking, is there any way to redesign the plan so that you didn't have to take out those trees?
To provide the space necessary for the proper circulation of parking in there, the parking lot did need to be expanded to the north. And so as we are providing, you know, replacement street trees for those, that will comply with all the city caliper requirements there. And that expansion does provide, you know, proper drive widths, proper parking stall dimensions, provide a better parking lot plan moving forward.
Because that is one question residents will ask. Well, why did the city cut down those trees? They didn't need to cut down those great, big, beautiful trees, right? And I just want to be in a position to be able to answer that
Sure.
every, you know, possible design was taken and there was no way around it, if that's the truth.
That's a good point. Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Don.
Parking lot over there off of, to the north side of 25th. That won't affect that running track and all of that?
No, it will not. It'll stay totally separate from
Yeah,
that.
on that note, and again, I'm looking at the vicinity map. I'm trying to, that is used for track and field practice, right? From what I can tell. I'm trying to understand how we've got a parking lot there, but if you look immediately to the east, there's, I assume that's a shot put or discus throwing angle. And so how do we protect anybody parked there from errant throws? Is there, I mean, it's kind of angled, so, you know, if somebody let go of it a little early, a little bit late, you're aimed right at the parking lot. So I don't know if that's part of the consideration or there's some way.
Sure, yeah, we looked at those spacing requirements there from in the northwest and also from the jumping events there to the east. There's that runway and pad there to the east. So yeah, I think we're comfortable with those dimensions.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The other question I had is, and this might be a little speculative, but what's the future plan for the North Clay building there? Do we know what uses it will have in the next 1 to 2 possible years? How do we know the parking lot going there is the right thing versus, you know, say it becomes elementary school again at some day and you need a playground or something else? How do we know what the greater vision is for the building in terms of what the school district wants to do?
Sure. Yeah, Patrick Smith with Insight Design Studios here, an architect working with the school district. He can give you a little more information on that building. One thing to note first is, you know, right now these parking lots are to make up for what's being lost at the current high school there to try to offset that parking loss with the improvements there. But yeah, Patrick can give you more details on the building.
Yeah, hi, with Insight Design Studio, we're an architect firm, and we've been working with the school district on more of a master plan situation along with the athletics side of what you're talking about. The first point is we're also looking at some improvements possibly at across the street, as well as how those throwing events might re-angle a little bit in conjunction with these parking lots. They're kind of two separate projects, but the thought is, you know, attacking them together with that mindset and what that future would be on the athletics side. On the school district, for what Norclay could be used for in the future, the school district's not 100% sure on that yet, but they've been kicking around a few ideas, and we've kept all of that in mind when we've been looking at the athletics master plan as well as this parking lot project as well.
Since you mentioned that in the next 1 to 2 years, keep in mind that the renovation of the high school is a 3-year project. So nothing's going to happen in Norclay for the next 3 years until that's finished.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioner?
My only concern about it is, there again, though, you said 80-some spaces?
Yes, there's 80 additional spots on
Is all
the,
the additional traffic on 25th Street for all the residents? And then they have to go up, what's the next one over, Cross Street?
Knox,
Knox.
yeah, come down there.
Knox to get out. And then, that's my only concern.
Yep.
Would the, and I think I brought this up last month, but we had at one point evaluated the use of the parking spots at Mackin Park, the large lot there, as additional parking that could be used instead of creating a new parking lot, you know, a block south roughly. What were the findings there? You know, how feasible did that become? How did that factor in?
So one of the ways when we started this process of where lots could go, where all these spaces, there was, you know, at the high school addition and renovation plans, there's roughly 181 spots being lost, and so they were looking at different opportunities to pick up those spaces. They looked at all 4 high schools in the district, and Staley's footprint from a parking lot standpoint is the largest, and so they started doing a radius of where the furthest spot in that parking lot is from the front door, started picking that up and trying to keep everything in as close proximity as that is. And Mackin Park's parking lot could be a spillover, especially maybe on a football night or something. But from a just day-to-day use for the students and staff, trying to keep those as close as possible.
So really just a proximity issue more than, okay.
I would say that staff was not really excited about that possibility because we do have programming at Mackin Park during the day when school is in session. And so that was not, you know, it didn't excite us just because of that.
Plus the fact that does that belong to the park department or does that belong to the city?
Well, the city owns it.
No, okay.
I think in general, and this came up at the meeting that they had at the high school, is because of taking all those parking spots away from that central location, and now you're going to have them in like 3 or 4, the traffic is going to just get nuts. The traffic's going to be terrible. And on a personal note, I sincerely hate this parking plan. I hate it. But, you know, I think the major concern of the people is not that we had to put a parking spot here or a parking spot there. It's because of where they're all located, and the traffic is just going to get maniacal. It's going to be a nightmare. And I think that's what Tom was alluding to, is it's not so much the parking lot, it's the traffic. And the traffic, you know, that I haven't heard anybody talk about traffic control. Have you? I've not heard anybody talk about traffic control. And when you talk about parking, traffic control is kind of a natural thing, I think, and no one's even spoken about traffic control. So I personally am not thrilled with any of these plans, to tell you the truth.
Highlight on yours, Dave, and I agree with you totally. Parking is one thing, but if you think of a shopping mall parking, people are coming and going at all different times of the day. The school district, the bell rings, and what's everybody doing? They're running to their cars and they're all leaving at once.
I just honestly don't think this parking solution, I don't think it's a solution. I don't think we're really gaining anything, but what can we do? Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth. Any other questions or comments?
Just one other, this is just from my maybe lack of knowledge. So when we have a proposal and it includes landscaping elements for a design, if you know, a year down the road, the landscaping fails, it failed, you know, transplant shock or whatever, and it looks terrible, is that then up to the city to go repair and replace, or is it up to the original build construction?
Well, we require applicants to maintain their landscaping when it's part of an approved site plan. So for instance, I've noticed that McDonald's, a couple of their junipers have died. We're gonna be sending them a notice sometime here soon to say, you need to replace your junipers because they're a part of the condition of the approval. So here, I believe that the lease agreement does call for the school district to maintain that parking lot. That would include if one of those trees were to, you know, die, we would be asking them to replace it. And the same thing with the landscaping on the North Clay lot. If it were to, you know, a year from now, you know, the plants were to have died, we would be requiring them to replace them.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, the only comment I've got is, and I agree with you, Dave, that it's not the best thing in the world, but it's going to happen. I mean, the school is spending $60 million to build this school. We definitely don't want them to move out of town. So I think we're just going to have to bite the bullet and go with it.
Okay, so what's next?
Staff comment?
Staff recommends approval. We did have some proposed conditions for approval of the site plan. They're on page 4. The first is about the size of the trees to be planted. The second is requiring a directional sign on the new driveway on 24th Avenue. And the third is that they would comply with all of their staff requests in building codes, utility requirements, or site plan requirements as we issue the building permit.
Is that last one not standard?
That's pretty standard for this kind of thing. Usually we don't have to put this condition on it because, you know, it's not going before you, but this was also a condition of the high school site plan approval.
Okay, so I guess we're up to entertaining a motion. I'll entertain a motion.
Well, I make a motion that we move that the planning commission approves the site plan subject to the following conditions. Is that what I do? Okay.
So moved. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, it's approved. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's not your fault we have parking issues. Item 6 is a public hearing consideration of various zoning text amendments for the city of North Kansas City.
Well, I would like to start by introducing Stacy Weideman, our intern for the summer. Stacy's put this application together, and so I'm going to have her give you the staff report and go over what our desired outcome with this amendment was, how we put it together, and what the recommendation is. I will say, for text amendments, we do publish notice in the Kansas City Star, which we did for this case. We do not mail notice or post a sign anywhere because this is a citywide amendment, and I will let Stacy take it from here.
Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you. Good evening. So recently, Wendy's was approved for a conditional use permit that exceeded 150% of their required parking spaces. Staff has been in pre-application meetings with other potential developments, and we recognize that this is an issue that will continue to arise. Due to this, staff has re-examined parking requirements for restaurants and fast food developments in the C0, C1, and C3 commercial zones. Currently, for those zones, we calculate commercial parking based on gross floor area, and we do not differentiate between different uses. Restaurant seating, however, is a fixed number, and looking only at floor area does not always accurately reflect a development's needs. So first, we looked at other cities in the area to examine their parking requirements and to get some ideas. We were interested in looking at maximum seating capacity as a way of calculating parking and as a way of better a better sign for development's needs. So we decided to examine how calculating parking based on seating capacity would have impacted recent developments. As you can see in the memo, we focused on Wendy's, McDonald's, and First Watch. Of course, First Watch, based on their location, is not required to provide parking, so that's purely an example. But I'd just like to point out that with this proposed amendment, this gets development quite a bit closer to the actual parking that they're currently providing. So staff would recommend that we modify the requirements for restaurants and fast food establishments in those particular areas at the rate of 1 parking space for every 2.5 seats provided. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Do you know how that compares to codes of other cities that are in the area?
Yeah, so I highlighted a few within the memo just to see how what we're doing now compares with other cities, and also to kind of get ideas to how other cities are gauging this issue as well. So as you can see, I looked at 4 other cities, and some of them are focusing on square footage, so gross floor area like we currently are doing. But as I mentioned, since restaurants and fast food places, they have fixed seating, so it might be perhaps a different strategy to focus parking based on the amount of people that are able to go to the restaurant and eat.
So you basically just looked at restaurants in this
Yes.
parking study?
Yes, this would, this amendment proposes to change only for restaurants and fast food.
Okay. Did I understand the chart correctly that currently most of them are providing more parking spaces than are required? But I noticed that the requirement, you're recommending the requirement actually be increased based on the new formula?
Yes, many restaurants do apply to provide more, and in fact, in the code, they're allowed to go up to 150% over the minimum required spaces.
We had a pre-application meeting a couple of months ago now and this architect, the impression I got was he was just appalled that they would have to get a conditional use permit to provide the amount of parking they wanted to provide for this particular development. 4.5 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet works for a lot of people, but restaurants like to overpark themselves. So, you know, we're just looking at almost every restaurant, and we have several that are kind of in the queue, would probably be coming to you for a conditional use permit. Not because they're, I mean, Wendy's is not really providing all that much parking, but the 4.5 is so low when you look at what a restaurant would like to have, that we just anticipate without this amendment, you're looking at a lot of conditional use permits over the next 6 to 9 months.
That was going to be my question is, are we opening up a can of worms for a whole bunch of conditional use permits? And look at it from the other side. If the requirement goes up, how many conditional use permits or variations or whatever are we going to have to entertain that they can't quite meet the requirement now and they want us to approve less parking? I mean,
we really think that this amendment is cutting down on cases coming before you that we don't think you will have an issue with. We may find that then we have the reverse of people who are coming in for some kind of modification. But based on what we see coming this way, we don't think that's the case.
Can you remind me what qualifies the definition that we're using for a restaurant, more than a certain percent of sales by food, or how do we define?
Just that the primary use is serving food, prepared foods.
all right, any other questions? All right, so what's next?
Well, In this case, you need to make a recommendation to the city council regarding the amendment to the ordinance.
Okay. Would anyone like to make such a recommendation?
Oh, yeah, public hearing.
Public hearing.
Thank you, Mallory. You need to take comments from the public.
Okay. Okay, so I'll
Sorry,
open.
we're thrown off by the beeping.
Sorry, I don't know what's wrong with the computer.
That's okay, and I didn't bring my notes, I apologize. So I will open the public hearing on this matter. Are there any comments from the public? Okay, hearing none, I will close the public hearing. And then we will entertain a recommendation from the Planning Commission.
Staff recommends that the amendment the recommendation is approved.
I move that we approve the recommendation on to the next step to the planning, not the planning commission, we're here, to the city council.
So moved. Any seconds?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Very well. Let's pass along that recommendation. Okay, item 7, public comments. Do we have any comments from the public? I'll open the floor.
Nope. We got
What?
353 chat.
Oh, sorry, it's not on my note. Excuse me. What's next?
It's not on the agenda.
It's not on my list.
Oh, it's not on this here either. Which one are we using? We using the one that's handed out or the one that you gave us?
Yeah, 7.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, all kinds of problems. We have an item 7, chapter 353, tax abatement qualifications study. You ready for that?
Yes, I guess we are. Item 7. Are you ready for that?
Is there a staff report?
Are you looking at what we sent out? What's on the
It's
website?
a whole big consultant report.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I remember now. It's just not on the agenda we have.
Yeah, I remember looking through it, but it's not on here.
Okay, well, we do have this.
Okay.
Mallory's no longer allowed to go on vacation.
It's been a while for
So-
me too, so.
Our 2016 master plan included a section on project-specific tools. It talked about a number of economic development incentive tools that are available. And it made a note about using 353 tax abatement for residential improvements. This is Chapter 353 tax abatement is typically done by commercial development and redevelopment, where you find a particular piece of property or building blighted, and then a city can adopt a tax incentive that allows the property owner to make improvements and not have to pay increased tax amount for a certain period of time. It's cost prohibitive for most residences to try to access that tax incentive because there are a lot of setup costs. You have to do a blight study, you have to put together a redevelopment plan, there's just some work. But Independence and Liberty in this area have done this in setting up Chapter 353 tax abatement programs for particular residential neighborhoods as a way to provide an incentive for property owners to invest in their residential property. And so our master plan recommended that we look into that as a way to fill a gap in incentive programs. So one of the first things you have to do in doing that is to do a blight study. And so we hired Jim Potter with Development Initiatives to look at the avenues and our traditional neighborhood and see if these neighborhoods could qualify for this type of tax incentive. And Jim is here to present his findings and walk through the study with you and answer any questions that you might have. And then Stacy has also prepared an annotated outline of what would be required to be presented in a redevelopment plan. Our desired outcome with you tonight is really to treat you as kind of a focus group for whether you think this is useful, if you have any concerns, any comments, before we take next steps in moving forward with the qualification study or putting together a plan. So with that, I will introduce Jim and let him talk to you about the qualification study that was in your packet.
Absolutely.
Initiatives. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Our address is 140 Walnut, Kansas City, Missouri. We were retained by the city to determine if conditions were present within the proposed redevelopment area which may qualify it under the 353 statute. Now, as Sarah mentioned, please keep in mind that this is one of the findings that this body and the city council is eventually going to have to make in order to improve the 353 plan. So the purpose of this analysis is to determine whether the subject area contains blighting or blighted conditions as defined in the revised statutes of Missouri. And that definition is included in the revised statutes, section 353.020, subsection 2. Kind of a lengthy definition. But essentially, this is a three-part test. The first part of the test requires that the redevelopment area as a whole is occasioned by any of the four following factors: age, obsolescence, inadequate or outmoded design, or physical deterioration. The second part of this test is that one or more of those four factors have caused the redevelopment area to become an economic or a social liability. And then finally, one or more of those factors are conducive to ill health, transmission of disease, crime, or the inability to pay reasonable taxes. Now, as part of our analysis, we didn't isolate or point out any particular properties. We were trying to be very respectful to the citizens of North Kansas City. But instead, we tried to take a more general, holistic approach, just identifying those factors which we might find within the two prospective redevelopment areas. So as Sarah mentioned, we looked at the traditional neighborhood, our traditional NKC neighborhood, and the avenues. The avenues, we looked at everything west of Quebec. You can assume that this is a pretty large area. It's about 111 acres. Total parcels within these two areas are approximately 827. So very large, lots of property parcels, lots of property owners. So let's run through our four factors real briefly here. Factor one, age. We did note that age was a contributing factor to the redevelopment area. Based on data we accumulated from Clay County, the average age of structures within these two neighborhoods is approximately 79 years. And keep in mind that the depreciation schedule for single-family residential is approximately 27.5 years. Therefore, without substantial renovation or maintenance, the majority of properties within the redevelopment area could theoretically have reached the end of their useful lifespan. Now, we don't think that's the case in this instance, but it brings up the key fact of maintenance and property repair. So I think we're all aware, the property owners amongst us, we're aware that as structures continue to age, various building systems deteriorate, namely HVAC systems, plumbing, electric, exterior envelope systems, roofing, etc. And without ongoing maintenance and regular repair, we're going to have significant deterioration. And that deterioration can lead to a functional or economic obsolescence, and in theory, lower property values for that particular property or the particular area. So our second factor is obsolescence. And we noted that obsolescence, as well as age, was a contributing factor to this area. Now, obsolescence is simply defined as the process of becoming obsolete or outdated. Within the redevelopment area, numerous improvements were identified as obsolete. These included deteriorating building components, obsolete structure design, and that primarily revolves around ADA accessibility issues, and then zoning and land use nonconformance. We did note several instances where you had non-compatible land use adjacent to a different land use. So it was kind of scattered and wasn't very prevalent, but we did want to note that. So obsolescence can also be conducive to ill health, transmission of disease, or particularly the inability to pay reasonable taxes. Similar to an aging property, obsolescence contributes to the ability of that property to generate reasonable tax revenue when compared to a modern or more maintained structure. All the while, the same property requires the same level of service, public service, if not more than a modern contributing facility. Examples of this are fire and police services, as well as city services, namely building inspection. So factor 3 is inadequate or outmoded design. We also noted this was a contributing factor within the area. I think we're all familiar, the redevelopment area resides in an area which has been developed for many years. Many existing improvements were designed in an era which didn't accommodate current building standards or codes. Again, this goes back primarily to the ADA compliance issues. We noted several non-compliant issues as far as ingress-egress in certain structures. We can assume that non-compliant restrooms are probably present, as well as limited vertical circulation within structures. We also noted several street pedestrian crossings which lacked current ADA improvements. So we definitely feel that this is a case for this area. A fourth factor, and this is our primary factor, is deterioration of site improvements. We noted deteriorated public and private surface paving systems, streets, alleys, private parking areas, sidewalks, etc. This deterioration can lead to hazardous conditions for vehicles, bicyclists, and pedestrian traffic. We also noted primary and secondary building structures, including roof walls, soffits, gutters, downspouts, exterior finishes, roofs, etc. The deterioration of building envelope systems particularly provides the opportunity for weather and water infiltration to occur, and this can lead to further deterioration in various structures. And finally, code violations. We did obtain code violation data from the city, and the redevelopment area experiences over 150 code violations per year. We look back from 2013 to 2017 and reviewed those violations. Typical violations include lack of yard maintenance, lack of exterior maintenance, abandoned property, ongoing deterioration, trash and debris illegally dumped, health and safety violations, inoperable vehicles. And that's language that the city uses. So I think that's kind of supports the deterioration factor. So those are our 4 factors, and that leads to our second test, which is one or more of those factors have caused an economic or social liability. And so let's focus on deterioration, since that's our primary factor that we had spoken about. Deterioration becomes an economic liability when a property is not producing the maximum economic benefit to the community, such as the ability to pay real property taxes. But as I mentioned previously, that particular property may require greater public expenses, such as fire, police, or city inspection services, namely nuisance code violations, which we just talked about. So deterioration also becomes a social liability when a property's lack of maintenance presents a health, safety, or concern for welfare of the public. When an area has a high percentage of properties that have physical deterioration, the economic liability of these properties generally lowers the value of that particular property or area and can often attract crime. This crime can be in the form of property crimes, trespassing, vandalism, robbery, burglary, etc., or personal crimes, assault, battery, or other violent crimes. And so that leads us into our third test, which is the predominance of 4 factors which have contributed to ill health, transmission of disease, crime, and the inability to pay reasonable taxes. And we already touched on code violations, but let's talk about crime a little bit, because we actually reviewed data, again, provided by the city from 2012 through 2017, and just these 2 neighborhoods, traditional NKC and Avenues, on average reported approximately 790 incidents or citizens' calls occurring on an annual basis. That's quite a bit for that area. So incidents ran the gamut from ambulance calls, robbery, harassment, welfare checks, theft, and vandalism. So we're talking about nonviolent crimes, but there were also several violent crimes, which we also noted. So in summary, we concluded that all four primary factors were present within the redevelopment area, and those have led to an economic or social liability. In turn, this provides conditions which are conducive to crime and the inability to pay taxes. As determined in our analysis, it is our opinion that the area qualifies under Section 353 of the revised statutes of Missouri. We have reached this opinion based on current conditions, existing conditions of improvements, the current condition of building infrastructure, and the potential redevelopment opportunities. It is our opinion that as it presently exists, these neighborhoods, the redevelopment area, taken as a whole, meet the statutory definition as outlined in 353.020 subsection 1 of the revised statutes of Missouri. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Don't sound good, does it?
Any questions or comments?
You know, I would like to point out, Mr. Chair, Sarah mentioned that there's a project in Liberty and Independence. We worked on both of those projects as well. The Liberty project in particular was in and around the downtown square. Both of them have been tremendously successful. It's basically an incentive for property owners to upkeep and maintain and improve their properties. So it seems like in both those communities, it's been a successful endeavor.
Maybe this is a historical question. I think the city has had incentives, improvements for residents. How is this different than maybe what we've had in the past for property owners to take advantage of?
Well, I'm not sure that we've ever done anything exactly like this in the past. We've certainly never set up a tax abatement program in the past for residential property owners.
Okay. There were maybe other incentives where they,
Well,
There was some sort of a coupon program or discount
right,
program or
maybe
something.
that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that's something we did just for 1 year.
Okay.
In conjunction with Sutherland's and Nuts and Bolts and A&N. But it was just to, it was a discount on, purchasing supplies.
I see. So on the areas you mentioned that were successful, where it's been used before, how, just saying that it's available is one thing, but getting residents to take advantage, what's been the big factor in terms of participation or really getting buy-in from the public that this is something they want to do?
yeah, I'm not exactly sure how Sarah set this program up, but in those instances, I think the major hurdle was marketing. So it's getting word out that that program is out there and citizens can utilize it. Your question previously about other programs, typically incentive programs are single entity driven. So you have a developer or user that is lobbying the city for some particular project, just one project or for one area. In this case, this is a more proactive project incentive area that the city is trying to minimize costs for its citizens. So in going through this process and setting this all up, it's almost so it's a quicker process to go through. It's almost administrative approval.
The thing I've got is about 80% of these properties are rental.
Exactly.
How do you motivate the landlords to invest in their properties and bring them up? I mean, if people are happy to live in it, and normally the rent's cheaper if the place is about to fall down, and people like cheap rent. Yeah, but how do we get to the landlords to?
I think part of it comes back to Jim's comment about marketing. Honestly, our hope is that some of our smaller landlords will be interested in the tax abatement and be motivated to consider making an investment because of this. You know, this is beyond meeting our minimum property maintenance requirements. It's hard for us to motivate people to make additional investments. But that's one of the reasons why we're working on this, is to say, you know, here is another reason for you to go ahead and do that. It's because you will see a benefit in your taxes for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, depending on.
I wish we'd have done this 3 or 4 years ago before I spent all that money fixing up my house. No, but just kidding. But I was thinking the exact same thing, Don. You know, Jim, I think this is a wonderful thing for residents, but a lot of those people are rental, and a lot of them are transient. They don't stay very long. We have a lot of landlords that don't live here. So I guess I'm a little like Don, is like, are we, I mean, I don't know that we're going to incentivize those guys at all. If they're not doing it now, I don't know if we're going to incentivize those guys at all. Or, you know, I just get this feeling like this would help make them a little bit more money, right? And I don't want to make the landlord more money. You know what I'm saying?
That's going to
That's my
incentivize them.
concern. Well, it's going to incentivize them to take the tax abatement, but, I mean, are there going to be particular guidelines for the improvements that need to be made and those kinds of things? Because,
That's an excellent question.
you know,
That is a nice segue into the outline that you have before you, that Stacy's put together. So you don't just adopt the qualification study and, you know, magically everything happens. You also have to put together a redevelopment plan that establishes some of those requirements for what are minimum investments, required improvements, what's eligible for this kind of program, what is the amount of the abatement and the period of time that it's offered for. So Stacy's done the research into this and talked to people at Liberty and Independence about it, to put this outline together for you. This is really just for conversation. It's not, none of this is set in stone, or we'd like some feedback from you. Feel free to ask questions of myself or of Stacy about this, or Jim, since he knows quite a bit about it. But that's one of the things to establish, is what would be required and what's ineligible. In general, ineligible improvements would be things that are not permanent. So like landscaping wouldn't be an eligible improvement. Swimming pools, I liked that on the list. So things that aren't considered long-term investments. And we could set some additional base minimums. For example, Liberty and Independence have a 6.5% 6.5% net present value of the 10-year abatement. Has to be, that's a minimum investment amount in the property to qualify for the tax abatement. But that can be, set based on what North Kansas City would like that to be. So we still have some work to do in setting all of this up. But our thought is, if we don't do this, then there is no incentive for people to make these investments. And they may still choose not to make these investments, but we're doing what we can to encourage that.
Most of our lots down in here, are they 50-foot lots or?
Most of them in the avenues, there are some that are larger, particularly as you get further to the east and along 25th Avenue. We might have maybe a couple that are a little smaller than that, but for the most part, they're in the upper 40s to 50 foot wide.
Yeah, that's another problem, is that, going in there and trying to fix up a house on a little lot like that is not too, you aren't going to really be able to fix it up that much to where you're going to get a higher class renters. I guess that's what I'm getting at. It's a problem. I'd like to go through there with a bulldozer and take it all out and start over, but that don't make sense. But But I agree with you, at least there's a place to start, and, okay.
Maybe one other question, you know, if, I was kind of looking at the application approval process, there's several steps there. Is there a way that has been done in the other cities that makes it easier for, you know, residents or landlords to understand what they need to do, or do they really get a list like this and kind of check it off?
Well, in our experience, there's some substantial guidelines, but if you hit, you know, I mean, there's three or four primary ones. You spend X amount, you have to provide your receipts, you have to make sure it's all code compliant, you know, you get the regular inspections. You know, it has to be the right type of improvement, just like Sarah mentioned. You can't put a hot tub or a swimming pool in and expect to get tax abatement for it. But if you're putting a new roof on your building or your house, that makes sense. So you have to meet a certain threshold. You know, the net present value threshold was kind of interesting. I wasn't aware of that one. You know, typically it's just a dollar amount or it's something in that regards. But yeah, I mean, I think there has to be. I think there also needs to be some type of clawback provisions from the city. I mean, I don't know if this is going to be a transferable. I mean, what if somebody goes in and improves their property and sells it, you know, a year down the road and makes a ton of cash? I mean, I don't really know if you've thought about that, but and I don't know what clawback provisions you might be able to institute.
Yeah, they're transferable.
Do we
Property was
have
sold.
civic-
Want to say anything else about application?
Yeah, so I looked pretty closely at both Liberty and Independence, and I spoke with the appropriate staff person there who had involvement in this. And the reason, perhaps why there's so many steps in this, is I wanted it to be really clear and like explicit, like what the process would look like on both sides. So if it looks a little long and daunting, that's probably why.
I would imagine that as you guys roll out this program, if it happens, you guys would have some educational events and like opportunities for landlords, especially maybe to come and hear about how they could take advantage of the program. So I imagine that people would hear about it in that way.
Yeah, and actually some of the feedback I got, I believe from Independence, but it might have been Liberty, because I asked what would be some changes you would make if you were redoing this program. And advertising was one thing that they brought up, that they would advertise a bit more.
I mean, I think it's a great place to start. We need to start somewhere, at least give, once we get all the fine tuning done, give the residents a chance to participate. I mean, it might work out great and it might not. I mean, we don't know, but at least they'll have the tools to use if they so desire, and everything in front of them. I mean, we can hold community events, we can put flyers in the mail, we can do whatever, but until we have it, something that they can sink their teeth into and use, we're just up here talking.
I would agree with that. I think for a resident, let me rephrase that. For a homeowner,
Yes.
I think this is an outstanding program. I'm cautious about landlords. And I don't have anything against landlords personally, and if any of you are landlords, I don't mean that. Some of my best friends are landlords, but you know, one of the things that we've talked about for years is encouraging home ownership. And if you dangle tax abatement in front of a guy that's looking for rental property, he's going to be down here in a heartbeat trying to buy more. I know how those guys think, right? So I'm just nervous that we're going to encourage even more rental properties by offering this carrot to somebody that doesn't live here, already has rental properties here. You know, he's going to see dollar signs. I can just see, you know, the wheels turning on somebody like that going, man, I got to get down there and buy a couple more properties so I can make more money, take advantage of this tax abatement. Now we're going to be 90% rental. And that's not an attractive alternative to me. But for a homeowner, I think this is wonderful. So I guess my input from a focus group standpoint is, let's be very mindful of landlords.
So I know you just got this, so you haven't had time to look through it, but we aim to address that concern in section 8.
I get that. It says it's not intended, but I'm telling you, it's gonna be a huge carrot for some of these guys. Some of these guys that already own several properties down here and they drive the avenues all the time looking for properties to buy.
The other issue to keep in mind is I don't know that we have a way that we could say this is for homeowners only.
I understand that.
And on a related note, in a lot of cases, we might not, I understand, this is maybe not going to come across the best way the first time I say it, but I think it's better for us to have people investing in the property, whether or not it's homeowner or rental, because that is better in general for the neighborhood to have investment, even if it's a rental property. So in some respects, we may not care if it's a rental property, if it's a well-kept and invested in rental property.
I can guarantee you the neighbors care.
I understand.
I get what you're
understand
saying.
neighbors care,
I understand what you're saying.
But
but
from a city perspective, it's better to have somebody putting money into the property, even if it's a renter living there.
I get that. I get that. I do.
Well, we had a landlord here that took real good care of his property, and when he bought something, he gutted it out and started over it, and he was probably one of the most disliked fellas in town, which I never did understand, but I don't know.
I think it's a good idea. Up until buying my house a little over a year ago, I rented my whole life. So I think that this is great for those people who are renting, because hopefully it makes the places that they're renting in North Kansas City, hopefully the landlords have a little incentive to make those places a little bit better for them. Although people might be happy to live in rental properties, people are never happy to live in rental properties that are falling apart. They do it, but they're not necessarily happy. So I think it's a great idea. Obviously, there's lots of steps we have to go through to develop the criteria for the program, but I hope that if we do create the program, that you do market it heavily to the property owners, whether they're homeowners or not.
My only thought was, if we do go forward with it, I would anticipate, the city probably handling more phone calls, questions, if the word got out. So that would just be something we would have to consider, training for staff and, information on the website and stuff. There will be plenty of questions and how do I, and does this qualify, and can you let me know before I, those types of things.
Will there be very clear-cut blighted area boundaries?
Well, and that's the whole point of the qualification study, is that it will set the boundary for the program, because the area will have to be qualified through the three-step process that Jim talked about in order to access the tax abatement. So if you're not in that area, you won't be able to use this. So I don't think we could legitimately find blight in Northgate. So we intentionally left that out. River Forest we left out partly to see, well, let's just start with 2 neighborhoods.
Sure.
And see how it goes. And then see if we wanted to expand this to include River Forest at some point in the future.
Yeah, because the other concern, and I'm just thinking of all these things, the guy across the street from me qualifies and I don't, right?
It would be the entire neighborhood. So every property within the neighborhood, as defined in the qualification study.
Okay, I get you.
So for the avenues, Jim mentioned that it was everything to the west of Quebec. We did not include the French Quarter. We did not include Spanish Eights.
Okay. Good stuff. You got a fun job, man. It's a fun job. Any other questions or comments?
What more do you need?
Well, We would love to have any additional feedback you might have on putting together the redevelopment plan. If you want to think about it and send us an email or drop by the office, that would be great. Because our next step is really to work on this. At some point, this will then need to go before the city council for them to make the official finding of blight and the qualification study. And there are additional steps. Our goal tonight was just to make sure you weren't going to say, oh no, we have zero interest in this. And to get any additional initial feedback you might have.
Very good. Okay, so.
Thank you for putting it together.
Yeah. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jim. Thank you very much. Okay, so on to the next item on the agenda would be comments from the public. Are there any comments from the public? Very quiet there tonight. All right, hearing none. Comments from staff?
We are expecting to have an August meeting. Our application deadline is next week, but we're expecting to get at least one case for your consideration. And I think that's all that we have tonight.
Wow, okay. Very good. Any comments from commissioners? Let's start down there with you, Tom.
No, sir, none this evening.
Mr. Mayor.
I think I've said enough.
Okay. Go right ahead. Everybody's talked out a little bit.
Yeah, I'm out of comments at this point.
Okay. Well, not to be the last guy, but parking. You know, I can appreciate, I was happy to see that you're starting to take a look at parking. I guess my question or comment would be, is there someone that's kind of looking down the road even further at designating different parking areas within the city? The whole thing with the high schools just brought up a whole lot of discussion, at least in my circles, about, you know, little bitty parking lot here, little bitty parking lot there, you know, traffic, all of that. So my curiosity is, are we looking at any other long-term parking opportunities, like
Yes.
structures?
So we discussed parking management plans in May. I think it was in May. So our plan is to be working on that later this fall. We just don't have the staff capacity to get to that project until later this fall when some other things have come to an end.
Okay, gotcha.
So we're anticipating doing that then.
Okay, thanks.
Are you aware of what we did down here by Paul and Jack's?
Shared parking.
Actually, the development company, Richard Lanning, came to the city and said that if we would rent that lot right south of their main office there, and then they would put a gate in that fence to where they would allow shared parking after 5:30 and all weekends, and we did that. I didn't think
Great alternative, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't think that they would ever let us use their lot, but they're the ones that approached us about it.
That's good.
And I really think that even John Miller and some of the people that own the land down there are starting to come over to thinking, well, maybe we ought to try to help everybody out.
Good. That's a good deal. Thank you. Okay, any other comments? All right, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, Sarah, and Stacy, and Mallory, and commissioners, and the public.
So it'll be interesting to see if we end up meeting.
I mean, I played golf before years ago, but I never.
You know what I heard, that the biggest complaint from the residents at the high school meeting was the teachers park in front of their house, and then they walk through their yard, cut through to the building they need to go to.
Shortest, least
So the biggest complaint was teachers parking there, which was fascinating. And I apologize, I read through materials, but I didn't bring anything with me.
somewhere north of Detroit, Rochester, Michigan.
We went through that at our church. There was some facts on people that wanted to cut down the big tree.
I did. My parents live not too far. They live in Lapeer, so just east of Flint now.
Well, you're gonna put a 2-inch back where you
They live on a lake, so
looked at
I enjoyed it.
it. 30 years to get even close to that. You get more shade that